Some things don't always go as planned. Who would have thought that a demon summoned into the world will be raised by good men, making him the sworn enemy of the very evil he's supposed to be? This is the story of the 2007 cartoon Hellboy, Blood and Iron. One night in the sewers, a pair of eyes watches a brawny red guy with cut-off horns, walking in waist-deep water. She is wondering if he is indeed Hellboy, the one who's supposed to have a glorious path, but ends up in a totally different direction. Hellboy talks to someone on the phone but hangs up after his instincts tell him that he's not alone. True enough, a minotaur-like creature with a metal arm comes out of nowhere and attacks him. Abe Sapien, an amphibious man, jumps out of the water and helps the red guy fight the minotaur. Hellboy manages to get the metal chain arm of the creature and use it against him, defeating him. However, another huge creature comes up, one with a small skull head. This time, Abe takes care of it by pulling its head off, making it fall dead on his colleague. They call their teammate, Liz, in the office to report what's happened, unaware that at that very moment, someone is watching their every move, wondering why they are going against their very kind. Meanwhile, in a frightful cemetery that leads to a ruined castle on a cliff, a group of men, including a priest named Father Lupescu, searches the grounds to find a missing woman. They arrive in a place full of torture devices, making the priest cringe as he imagines how they are used. When they finally find the girl they're looking for, she's already unconscious beside a bathtub full of blood. Bite marks on her neck tell them that she might turn into a vampire herself, and so they decide to put a stake into her heart. However, Father Lupescu does not want to take part in that and runs away. After making sure the girl is dead, the party searches for the tomb of Elizabeth, the vampire responsible for the incident, but finds the tomb empty. To their surprise, in a blink of an eye, one of them, the bulkiest of all, is missing. Drops of blood fall on them, and turning their gaze to the ceiling, they see their comrade being drained of blood by a female vampire. She drops him dead and the men flee, except for Professor Broom, who tells them to stick together and not run away. They do not dare obey him though, as fear creeps into their hearts, especially after wolves go after them, and so the professor is left alone. Candles light one after another with eerie blue flames before the vampire faces him. She begins talking to him, but he takes out a flask. She asks if it's something to calm his nerves, but he replies it is holy water, as he quickly throws it at her, burning her face like acid. Furious with what he's done, she comes at him, not knowing that behind him is a glass window. As they fall outside, the curtain covering them comes off, and sunlight burns Elizabeth into flames. She turns into ashes midway in the fall, while Professor Broom manages to hang on to the balcony floor, unaware that her ashes find their way inside the castle to hide in a tomb. Decades pass, and old Professor Broom is haunted by the memories of Elizabeth. One morning, during their briefing, a publicity stunt case in the Hamptons on Long Island catches the interest of the professor. It's a case about a haunted mansion bought by Oliver Trumbold, a friend of the senator who has a say in the Bureau for Paranormal Research and Defense's budget. It is considered a low-priority case, but Professor Broom insists on their top-notch team consisting of Hellboy, Liz, Abe, Junior Agent Sidney Leach, and himself taking care of it, despite the others' protests. His team worries that he is coming with them because it's been a long time since he's been on a mission, considering his age. They ask him for the real reason they should prioritize this case, but the professor says once he's sure, he will tell them. A huge chopper takes them to the haunted mansion. They meet the owner, Trumbold, and they set up their equipment. When night falls, the group starts to see ghostly apparitions. Liz and Sidney see statues crying, and the ghost of a peasant girl. They ring up Babe and tell him about it, but at that time, he already feels a drop in temperature. Then ghosts of many girls leave their handprints on the window. As for Hellboy, spinning knives and hooded ghosts with skulls for heads appear before him. Finally convinced that there are indeed ghosts in the mansion, Hellboy goes to the professor and asks him what it's really about. He also tells him he's worried if the professor can handle it due to his age. The latter retorts that though he's old, he's not yet retired. The others arrive in the same room to start monitoring the place. The creepy butler arrives to serve snacks and leaves immediately, saying he never stays there after dark. Wise choice, my man. Trumbold stays with them, excited to hear that there's a huge possibility that the haunting is real. Right after they turn off the lights, ghosts coming from all parts of the house appear on the monitors, and then all of a sudden they disappear on screen. It turns out that they are on their way to the very room they are in. They see the throngs of ghosts arriving, all of them coming after Professor Broom. The professor floats in the air as the ghosts come at him. He mumbles something and they are gone, leaving only a magic circle with eerie writings on the floor around him. Trumbolt feels great knowing that there are real ghosts which can make the place famous. However, the professor says it's a very serious situation, explaining to them the meaning of the writings and telling them who the ghosts are. He explains that the ghosts are the victims of Erzsébet, the Hungarian blood countess who is known for bathing in the blood of young women to stay youthful. He added that on top of that, she becomes more atrocious after her death when she has become a vampire. The team suspects that someone is trying to bring her back to life, and that it can only be done if something very close to her is used. Trumbolt shows them a room full of things related to Erzsébet, like the torture devices in her castle before and an image of Hecate. According to the professor, Erzsébet is once a high priestess of that goddess. Professor Broom warns Trumbolt that the things modern man regard as fairy tales and legends are actually true and scarier than people thought, but the businessman doesn't listen. A flashback of what happened in the 1930s is shown, how Erzsébet haunts Father Lupescu, daring to enter holy ground and mocking his faith. Back in the present, Trumbolt calls someone, telling him to find more haunted places like that. He adds that he will double the ticket prices now, knowing that the ghosts are real, and he'll try to get the morbid professor out of his way. In the monitoring room, Sidney hears some strange sounds, and so he, Hellboy, and Abe decide to go out of the room to check things out, leaving Liz to take care of the sleeping professor. Meanwhile, two witches, the ones whose names are mentioned in the magic circle that appeared in the haunted mansion, are casting a spell which aims to bring back Hecate's priestess, Erzsébet. A flashback of what happened years back is shown, when the witches find a young bride to be named Anna, and urge her to fit her wedding dress one night. However, upon arriving in the shop, the young woman finds not the seamstress but Erzsébet, who preys on her the moment she mentions something about age that irked the vain vampire. Back in the mansion, Trumbolt is attacked by the witches and Erzsébet's wolves while he's in bed. The motion detector in the basement is acting up, so Hellboy and the rest go there to check. There, they find the familiar-looking groundskeeper who has blood on him. They check where the trail of blood leads and find a wall at the end. Sidney, the human metal detector, checks for a way in and finds a secret passageway that leads to Trumbolt's room. There they find Trumbolt dead and drained of blood and a bathtub full of it. Hellboy questions the groundskeeper, but Professor Broom, who recognizes the old man as Father Lupescu, stops the red guy. He introduces the former priest to them. The latter reveals to them that the witches are trying to raise Erzsébet, and the bathtub full of blood is something they will need when she awakes. The former priest knows that the witches are in the grove, but doesn't want to come with the professor's team because of fear. The professor understands and tells him he's done enough. He thanks him and hands him a cross before they leave. However, once he's left alone, the hags appear and cast a spell on him. One of them writes a spell on a witch's doll that looks like him, and he then turns into a werewolf. He comes after Hellboy and his team and fights against them. Abe tells the others to proceed to the grove while he and Hellboy fight with the werewolf. Unfortunately for him, he smashed into the wall during the fight, rendering him unconscious. One of the hags drags him away from the scene, while the red guy and the werewolf wrestle. Abe opens his eyes to see the two witches choosing which blade to cut him with. Meanwhile, Hellboy finally kills the werewolf. Sidney arrives, and they try to find the others. Liz and the professor, on the other hand, are surrounded by wolves, but before she can do anything, the wolves back off, making the old man realize that they were sent not to harm them but to delay them. They hurry towards the grove, but when they arrive, they realize they might be too late because Erzsébet has already taken a bodily form, ugly and withered as it is, but still flesh and blood. The vampire manages to hit Liz, rendering her unconscious, but when she tries to touch her in order to take away her youth, she gets burned with the fire starter's heat. Before she can harm the professor, Hellboy arrives to his rescue. However, Erzsébet, summoning the power of Hecate, creates a huge crack in the ground that eats up Hellboy. She then flies off with Professor Broom back into the mansion. When Hellboy wakes up in the underground ruins with huge menacing statues, he faces Hecate, who tries to persuade him into taking her side, but when he refuses, she attacks him with venomous snakes. In the mansion, Abe frees himself from his chains and fights with the bloodthirsty hags who transform into harpies. They fly and wrestle with him in the air, but having the upper hand, one of them wounds him on the back using her claws and Abe falls unconscious on the ground. Liz wakes up to the howls of wolves that surround her. They get ready to pounce on her, but she summons her pyrokinetic abilities and puts them all aflame, burning each one to ashes. Abe, who survives the fall after his fight with the harpies, arrives to check if she's okay. Back in the mansion, inside Trumbold's room, Elizabeth bathes in the bathtub full of the businessman's blood. In no time, her youth returns. She gets out of the tub, soaked in blood and vanity. However, to her horror, she begins to wither and decay shortly thereafter. Professor Broom explains that he added holy water into the blood, poisoning it. In one last act of anger and desperation, she attacks the old professor, but he takes a piece of wood from a broken chair and stakes her through the heart. Elizabeth turns into dust, her last traces blown by the wind, leaving only her ring on the floor. The skull ghosts haunting the mansion return to their true appearances, young, beautiful women whose youth the vampire once stole to feed her vanity. They smile at the professor before fading into the night, including Father Lupescu, all of whom are grateful that they finally find peace in the afterlife. As for Hellboy, he manages to get back to the surface despite the snake attacks. When he thinks it's over after covering the hole in the floor, Hecate possesses the Iron Maiden and transforms it as a part of herself, bombarding the red guy with a barrage of attacks. The witch harpies arrive to praise the goddess, but one of them gets killed by Hecate's tail, making the other escape in fear. The combat between Hecate and Hellboy wrecks the mansion. Their fearsome fight leads them to the monitoring room where the others have just arrived. They try to help their teammate using their powers, but to no avail. Hecate is just too powerful. Battered and badly wounded, Hellboy realizes Hecate's weakness, sunlight. He lures her out where she gets burned by the sun's rays, and left with no choice, she turns into a snake that creeps back into the darkness of her realm where she belongs. Professor Broom recalls the time when he was younger, when his courage took him to the dangerous path of fighting evil. A colleague asks him about the right hand of doom in the drawing on his table, one that looks very similar to Hellboy's oversized hand. He recognizes it as something that will bring about the apocalypse, something wicked beings will use to bring fire into the world. The professor replies that if evil people can use something like that to bring catastrophic events into the world, it can also be used for something good as well. For those that cause people trials will bring them to triumph, the exact same philosophy he uses to make the boy from hell become an instrument of good.